Welcome to the Stable Minded Podcast, where we simplify the process of authentic life transformation through heart, soul, mind, and body restoration. I'm your host, Lisa Pulliam, founder of Stable Minded, trained as a trauma-informed coach and clinical counselor, specializing in partnering with horses to improve overall well-being. I am most passionate about integrating faith with neuropsychology in the pursuit of healing and growth, blending evidence-based practices that align with biblical principles. Whether you are struggling with your faith, living a life with constant buzz of anxiety, wondering if ADHD is why you feel so chaotic, worried that trauma is a bigger part of your story, or feeling just like you can't ever get out of the stuck cycle, this Stable Minded Podcast is for you. It is for us. So take a deep breath, lean in, and gain the tools and the inspiration you need to become stable-minded and live the life you were made for. So today I really want to touch on the subject of ADHD and women. It's been something I've been writing and talking a lot about in the last year and a half, 2 years. And I want to focus this time in particular on kind of the highlight reels of ADHD, women, girls. Why now? Why is this suddenly all over social media? What does a diagnosis mean? Does everybody need to get on medication? Is this just an excuse? Isn't this willpower? Is this just about menopause? All the things. There's lots of questions around this, and I'm finding myself addressing those questions more and more in sessions with clients, as well as just everyday conversation with my friends, with my community. Having been in an educator kind of setting, a lot of my friends are in some capacity teachers, or they've been in education for a long time, and they are having trouble understanding the change in what ADHD is looked at and how it shows up from old ways of thinking about it. And so I just want to touch on that because this is such a personal subject to me. I struggle with ADHD that went undiagnosed from the time I was a little kiddo, of course, and it wasn't something that was looked at back then, all the way through. I did not come to see and realize my diagnosis until about 2 years ago when we were walking through that with my young adult daughter. And as we were exploring and watching what was happening in her, recognizing what was happening in me throughout my life, and all the strategies I had put into place in order to balance things out. And since then, I've dove into a number of certification trainings as part of my continuing education as a therapist, but because I wanted to know more beyond my personal experience. I think it's really easy to, it's that confirmation bias. Like once you learn the information, then you see it. And so now you think you see it all the time. It's like, if you go car shopping and you're going to get a red Jeep, that's what you're looking for. And now suddenly you see red Jeeps on the road all of the time. Are there actually more red Jeeps on the road, or have you suddenly become attuned to seeing those red Jeeps? Probably the latter, right? They've always been there, but now you see it. And that has been my experience with ADHD for sure. So one thing I want to clear up from the beginning is that the former diagnosis would be ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADD, attention deficit disorder. The DSM made changes in that diagnosis. So everyone now who falls on the spectrum of this diagnosis, and it is a spectrum, it is from mild to moderate to severe, and it also reflects the inattentive versus the hyperactivity. So everyone gets the ADHD diagnosis, but then it's qualified with inattentive or hyperactivity or a combination of both. So that is one of the reasons why I could say I have ADHD, and you might not see me as a hyperactive individual, but if you dove into my mind, you would see me as the inattentive. person. And even that is a misnomer because you wouldn't know that I'm inattentive because I have worked so hard to compensate for those skills that I need in order to truly focus on you and listen to you. It's been a skill set that I have cultivated, but it doesn't mean it's easier. It means it's an effort that I'm always putting forth. Does that make sense? So the first person that I first heard teach about this was when I was in grad school, and it was a recording he had presented. His name is Russell Barkley, and he's since retired, but he has multiple books and trainings out there, and was one of the first times I heard about ADHD from the perspective of it's not something you grow out of. This isn't a disorder that suddenly you learn the skills and now you don't have it anymore. It is not a disorder of lack of self-will or willpower or lack of effort towards self-control. It is a disorder in which the brain has not developed like a neurotypical individual. So the functioning part of the brain that is affected is the neocortex. And that is responsible for executive functioning, meaning time management, time awareness, time organization, prioritizing consequences, um, working on like being able to help you have some self-regulation and not be impulsive. The inhibition parts of the brain are not working in the way that they should be working. And what's interesting in my training, I learned early on when I became an equine assisted therapist that the prefrontal cortex of a horse is non-existent. That's what I was told when I first started. And since then, evidence has shown that a horse does have a prefrontal cortex, which makes sense. It's just really small. And whereas a child is born with a prefrontal cortex, but that prefrontal cortex takes 25 or more years to fully develop. And the fullness of that development has much to do with the patterned, predictable, rhythmic, and regulated environment that that child is in. And so, follow me here for a second. Trauma and dysregulation affects the way the brain functions in its neocortex and in its prefrontal cortex. So let me see if I could clarify this for a second. So basically, you have a child at 2 who has not experienced any trauma, perfect home environment, and they continue to grow up in a really wonderful, regulated way, but they seem to have executive functioning issues. Is that ADHD? It could be because it could be genetic. You have a child who is born into a environment that was a lot of stress, a lot of chaos, possibly abuse, possibly emotional neglect, and they also are now in an environment as they continue to grow that is impacting that. That affects the brain function. It affects the prefrontal cortex. It affects the neocortex. And so, okay, now you've got these two-year-olds, one in a healthy environment, one in a not healthy environment. And at the same level in grade school, as they continue to develop, they are starting to show struggles. And so, is it trauma and ADHD in the traumatized child, or is it ADHD or a lack of self-control or a lack of willpower in the other child? And ADHD sort of answers the question potentially for both of these children. I compare this to a horse because it when you interact with a horse, you see their ability to learn and remember. You see their ability to exert self-control and understand cause and effect. So we have this child in a difficult home environment with symptoms as they grow up that There's evidence of traumatic responses. There's a hypervigilance. There's a fight flight response in them. There's some rebellious behavior. There's some withdrawing behavior. Maybe there's some depression that starts to present. And as they continue to age, this becomes evident in their struggles socially, their struggles with schoolwork, their struggles with making decisions. And from the outside, people look at their environment and what they grew up in, and you're like, well, that makes sense for their struggles, right? You look at the other child who has a perfectly wonderful and healthy family situation, has been given the right and the proper kind of nurturing and attunement and support, and they're struggling the same way. So why, right? We want to know why, what is different? Well, what if the answer is that both from a genetic perspective have ADHD? And maybe the child in the better home environment has the potential to do better because of the supports that are in place from the parents who are present in that situation versus the other child who just continues to struggle and go down that road. If we could get to a place of accepting that we don't necessarily understand as we're interacting with somebody we love or that we're teaching or that we care for or that we're serving, how life has impacted their ability to learn and think and develop and the skills that they're able to gain. If we could look at those children, those teens and young adults and say, did they get everything that they needed in light of how they are made and in light of the environment that they lived in? And if not, what does the work need to be right now in their life? What does the repair work need to be? So I'm talking very much like as a therapist, thinking about the clients that I've been working with, as well as just my own struggle and what it's been like to kind of bear witness to that as I've watched my kids become young adults and understand the impact that I've had on them. And then also in this new season of life as a Gigi, I get to watch my grandson one day a week. And I jump in when my daughter or my son-in-law are sick and then get him for those opportunities. So I have had these flashback moments of, wow, if I knew then what I know now about the way my brain and body functions, I would have been an entirely different mom. I would have expected a different level of functionality from me. I would have put more support strategies into place. I would have adjusted the way we did life. I would have been able to advocate for myself better, to reduce the stress, to reduce the anger, to reduce the guilt and the shame. So, part of growing up is like you have the opportunity to look back and be like, well, if I'd like to do that differently. But I say that because I know what life is like on this side of being medicated for ADHD and the breadth of skills that I have gained independently of knowing that I had ADHD in my effort to survive. And so I want to talk a little bit about those skills and even like how this fits into the context of my faith. Um, and how it has all come together to get me to this point in life where I'm able to run my own business. I've been able to go to grad school. I've been able to maintain healthy relationships. These are all things that typically for a female struggling with ADHD is a struggle. So I want to read to you a quote by another person. His name is Dr. Hallowell, and he has the Hallowell ADHD Centers. And he writes on his website in the FAQ about ADHD different in girls and women. He writes this: the diagnosis of ADHD gets missed all the time in females as there are gender differences in the ADHD symptoms. Women and girls tend to not exhibit disruptive or defiant symptoms, unlike men and boys. They may not stand out. Rather, they sit in the back of the classroom, lost in their thoughts, daydreaming, quite content to be in their own world. As adults, they tend to underachieve, not due to lack of talent or hard work, but due to lack of focus and organization, the classic signs of ADHD. If they do seek help, they typically get diagnosed with depression or anxiety because doctors tend to not think of ADHD in females. They may well have depression and anxiety, but the depression and anxiety are caused by the untreated ADHD. Treating the ADHD often fixes the anxiety and depression because the women will feel much more in control, hence less anxious, and will perform up to potential, will takes away the so-called depression. So one would not describe me as underachieving, but I would say hands down, I was that daydreamer in the classroom. And I have been a visionary and a creative and a fantasy prone thinker. And that fantasy prone came out of the survival strategy, having not had the safety and the support from my family that I needed throughout my childhood. So I think what ended up happening was like, I can't depend upon anybody else. So I have got to figure out a system to succeed. And I really don't think I would have been able to be where I am today if it wasn't for the kind of stabilization and support I've received from my husband. We're going to be married 30 years, and he has been the stable, steady ship that has held down the job, that has allowed me to jump from career direction to career direction and to support me as I've been like navigating, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Is that what I'm supposed to be doing? I also, so you might not see on the outside what's happening behind the scenes on the inside. The other aspect of it is that my faith has really shaped me in that I believe in stewardship of our gifts. I believe that God has made us on purpose, with purpose. We are fearfully and wonderfully made and complex, which I've talked about before. I think about Psalm 139, where God knit us together in our mother's womb. He knows us before we took our first breath, and He has a plan for our lives. And I have clung to that truth that God has a plan for my life. And I've spent so many hours of the last 32 years seeking the Lord and saying, what is your plan? What do you want me to do? How do you want me to use my resources and my gifts and my talents? And so that faith component has been a check and balance system and a plumb line for keeping the impulsivity from happening, right? So with ADHD, the ideas are like through the roof and for some people, and being able to prioritize and know what should I do next. And even right now, like recording this was a seize the moment. You have 1 hour. This is a seize the moment teaching. I've had this on my to-do list for a long time. I haven't known when to do it. The awareness of ADHD in my life is very fresh, and I'm like, I'm going to do this now. And there's probably 18 other things I need to do right now that I can't remember, and I don't know which one to do. So I'm just doing this because the energy is there around recording this teaching. So, and I'm all over the map with this, right? So my faith, because I want to do what God wants me to do and I want to steward the gifts and talents well, it has slowed me down uh, and caused me to not just run with an idea. My biblical view of marriage and being in a marriage with a husband who loves me and is kind to me and gentle with me and wants to support me, and where we feel like a team, has caused me not to go off and running on a new idea, even in a financial purchase, like buying something. We've had these checks and balances of like, if it's over this number, we talk to each other first before we spend the money on it. Or if it's this kind of commitment, we talk to each other and we pray about it before we move into that. So that kind of like patterned way of being and the accountability part of it keeps the ADHD from like running my life when it comes to the impulsivity side that some people can't see. And yet, there's another aspect to it that is really important to know is that when I get bored, I want to pivot. When it's no longer novel and new, um, I want to move on to the next thing. And that made running my ministry more to be. I ran it for 10 years. That it was hard because that was more longevity and more routine and more monotony than I normally could endure. I mean, that was God's grace that I was able to do that for that long. And so, how did I get there? There was accountability to it, there was greater purpose. So, Howell talks about, I believe it was Howell that I hope I'm quoting him correctly. He uses an acronym called RAN, RAN, and the R is for reward, the A is for accountability, and the N is for novelty. And that is really the inside of a ADHD creative type, meaning you need to see, and I'd say even more than just a creative type. It's inside of a student, it's inside somebody in a workplace, it's inside a homemaker, it's inside of a mother. That what is the reward of doing this? Can I tangibly understand that? And understanding reward becomes really challenging because time, the part of your brain that is responsible for time, doesn't function the way it's supposed to. So ADHDers end up feeling like now or never, which quickly turns into black and white thinking and cognitive distortions because now or never then gives way to compulsivity, like all in. I got to get this done. I can't go to bed. I have to hyperfixate on it. I have to talk about it over and over again. I can't let the thought go out of my mind because as soon as it's gone, right? And the ability to retrieve that becomes super challenging. And yet, then that turns into workaholism, right? It turns into not respecting boundaries and relationships with other people, saying you're going to be done in 5 minutes, but now you're done in 25 minutes. Because the other aspect of the time piece is there's not an awareness of passing time, and there's not an awareness of how long something actually takes. And so, in terms of reward, you have to be able to calculate what is going to be the outcome of this effort. And in terms of time, an aspect of that, you have to be able to calculate time. And that is where strategies need to start being put into place for somebody who struggles with ADHD. So, in our digital age, most of us don't have clocks in our homes anymore. And we can't visibly see time. And that is a problem because we turn to our watch or to our phone for time. And do you know what happens with that? We get distracted. Go to pick up the phone and there's notifications there. We can't remember what we were doing. Now we're on to the next thing. So, in fact, we probably need to turn all of our notifications off on our phone. And we need to have visual clocks in our rooms that show us the time. And we need to become best friends with the timer app on our phone or on, um, kitchen buzzer timers or sand timers. We need external support to measure time all of the time. It does not get better. That is a part of the brain that does not get repaired. Even though there's neuroplasticity and we can learn new ways of doing things, that neural pathway needs to be, I always have to use my phone or use my notebook to write down my to-do list, to use my timers, to have these systems that I put into place. And when I stop using the system, come up with a new system so that I have these external supports to keep me moving forward. And Barkley, in that original training that I was mentioning, he instructed parents to tell their children and help their children remember things by writing them down. And that every little ADHDer through a grown adult should have a notebook slipped into their back pocket or somewhere on their person that they write everything down. And you train that child early on. Okay, it's time to go upstairs and put your pajamas on and brush your teeth. You're saying this to like your 8-year-old, and they pull out their notebook and you say, pull out your notebook and write down what you're supposed to do. And then when you get to the top of the stairs, pull out your notebook. And a minute later, you're like, did you pull out your notebook? So that you're helping train them to use a resource to manage their ADHD throughout their lifetime, right? So I've got planners galore, post-it notes, and lists. I have to every single day look at that to figure out what my life is like. And every night I have to rewrite it, and every morning I have to reevaluate it. And it has to be something I physically interact with, in addition to whatever online tools I use to organize my life. Uh, we have a shopping list on the Reminders app. And the great thing about that is I can voice type it. So when I'm in the middle of doing something and know by the time I get my hands out of the sink, I'm going to forget that I just used the last egg. So now I can say, hey, Siri, add eggs to the grocery list. And that I no longer have to expect myself to remember it because I won't. I have to put things in the same place again and again so that I don't lose it. And I still struggle with that. I have to, in my calendar, put what time I have to leave, what time I need to arrive by. I need to figure in margin time because I'm going to forget something on the way out the door. And I'm going to have to run back into the house for it, no matter how well I have planned, because unexpected things happen. So there has to be extra margin around that. So the R is the reward, the A is the accountability, and I've talked about that. I have accountability with God. I want to please him. I want to have him say to me, well done, good and faithful servant. I want to be faithful at the things he has given me gifts around and um, responsibilities around. And I want to be accountable to my husband and to our children and to the clients I'm working with and to the people I've made commitments to. So that accountability piece is a motivator. It's also a factor for super sensitive, people pleasing females who have ADHD. When they fail in that way, it is devastating. It is crushing. The shame is there because there's this part that doesn't function that you still feel like is your fault because you can't see the inside brokenness on the outside, right? When I tore my ACL, I had to wear that clunky knee brace for weeks, months. And while that brace was on, people knew I couldn't function the way I normally could function. I couldn't function like them. But that brace came off, and I still didn't have my strength back, and I wasn't fully healed. And yet, the expectation is that I should function normally. And nobody wants to feel weak, right? Nobody wants to feel like they're incompetent or incapable at something. And so that is a huge struggle for people with ADHD is that especially if they're met with like, of course you're late, or oh, you forgot your phone again, or don't you know the time, or why are you so sensitive, or you're often running to a new thing, or why are you so busy and you can't sit down? How come your mind's always running? I mean, there is a list of things that ADHD girls and women have heard over their lifetime that are the exasperation of their family members, right? Well-intentioned and loving, sometimes hurtful and critical, right? Like it is a rough experience to live that way. And when you come to realize this has been pervasive throughout my lifetime, and I have managed because of how hard I work. So I believe it's Ari Tuckman is another person that I have sat under their training of, but pervasive through these experts in the field is that despairing sense of I'm just not good enough, no matter how hard I try. And no matter what I do, I repeat the same pattern over and over again. And it is despairing to me. And I feel that, right? And this season of coming to understand that is ADHD in my life has also created conflict because people who don't understand it think that it is potentially an excuse. And I have had to explain, like, when I name that that is my ADHD, that is me releasing the shame I feel inside and trying to accept my limitation while learning to adjust what I expect of myself. So, for example, I've come to the place of I will never get better at time, but I can learn how to use all of these tips and tricks for managing time better. I will never get better at remembering the facts that should be important while easily remembering things that are very visual. And I will be okay with that experience because that is how God made me. Why? I don't know. Is it the byproduct of trauma? Is it the byproduct of genetics? I could say, yeah, that too. It is who I am. And I'm learning how to embrace that in my life in a really fresh and holy way. And then ending on this, the novelty part, new things release the dopamine that the ADHDer typically doesn't have in a regular uh, experience, right? Like, and that is where the anxiety and the depression overlap, is that there's a, I guess we can call it a chemical imbalance. I'm not sure about the proper language on that because I don't remember those kinds of details. But I know the gist of it is that they're starting something new is very exciting and you could go all into it because your brain is tracking on something that is novel. And once that novelty wears off, the energy around it tends to dissipate. And that is where accountability, reward, stewardship, uh, breaking down the bigger picture into short-term action steps is really important. And so that piece, understanding that there needs to be some novel in every ADHDer's life, and yet understanding how that can also sabotage things that require long-term commitment and looking for ways to find the balance on that. So, lastly, I want to end with this. In terms of that dopamine issue and the brain function, Hallowell talks about two things that are really important. Barkley mentions this as well, is that physical activity is really important for an ADHD person to experience that hormonal shift in their body, that cortisol shift in their body to help them be energized and focused. And that balance exercises is also shown, 10 minutes of balance exercises a day has shown to improve cognitive function as well, which is why horseback riding is not something that I consider just my hobby anymore, but I consider it part of my executive functioning uh, therapy, really, because when I'm riding a horse, it activates movement, it activates balance. And Holloway also talks about the importance of connection in relationship. And so I'm getting that heart to heart nervous system co regulation with the horse. And all of that is has an incredible calming effect on my body, and then out of that calm, I have great clarity and improved functionality in every aspect of life. So, what do you do if you can't horseback ride? The rhythmic movement is really important, and rhythmic movement in relationship. That's why a fitness class can be really beneficial, or tennis, or bicycling with somebody else, where you can tap into movement, balance, and connection at the same time is really a key for emotional health and physical health for somebody who is suffering with ADHD. So that is like the overall crash course of some of the ways that ADHD presents in women and presents in girls and presents in the brain, and why it is such an it was such an undiagnosed issue in girls, and why it's becoming so pervasive now is because there's more understanding about the differences of how it shows up in girls that is finally being disseminated. There's actually studies back to the 70s about this, but it never got the traction that it deserved. And so I'm here to offer some of that encouragement to get help for yourself and get help for your girls if you are suspicious that this is part of your struggle, because once you know it is, you're released from the shame of not being good enough, because you can start to do things about it. And whether that is partnering with medication, or that is just ADHD therapeutic interventions, either way, it's just a great there's so much hope for those who are struggling when they understand that this is part of the story, and it can even resolve the issues of undiagnosed anxiety and the worry that we experience, especially as Christian women. And we think, what's wrong with us? What's wrong with our faith? So I'm going to pick up with this more in a future teaching. But for now, I want to leave you with that. It's a lot, and I'll put all sorts of links for further study for you to look at. I just thank you so much for being with me here, and I hope that this has encouraged you and support you to live out your faith in a really healthy, trauma-informed, understanding sort of way. This is what integrating faith with neuropsychology is all about. See you next time. Thank you for joining me on the Stable Minded podcast to begin your process of authentic life transformation that leads to heart, soul, mind, and body restoration. Visit stableminded.us/podcast. You will find complete show notes and resources to support you in this journey of becoming stable-minded. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your friends and family. Your support continues the ongoing work of stableminded.us. The Stable Minded podcast, hosted by Lisa Pulliam, is intended for informational and educational purposes only. The content shared in each episode, including discussions, interviews, and advice, reflects the personal opinions and professional insights of the hosts and guests. The information provided on this podcast is not a substitute for professional mental health care, counseling, or therapy. Listeners should consult a licensed healthcare professional for specific advice regarding their personal situations. Reliance on any information provided by this podcast is solely at the listener's discretion and risk. While every effort is made to provide accurate and up-to-date information, neither Lisa Pulliam nor the Stable Minded podcast assumes any responsibility for errors, omissions, or outcomes resulting from the use of this information. By listening to this podcast, you agree that neither the host, guest, nor affiliated parties shall be held liable for any damages, loss, or harm arising from the use or misuse of the information presented. If you are experiencing a mental health emergency, please seek immediate assistance from qualified healthcare provider or call emergency services in your area. Thank you for listening to the Stable Minded podcast.